Welcome back to Active Ingredients, the show that unpacks what it really takes to lead, grow, and stay human in the world of life sciences. Today's guest is Erin Federman, a strategist, a systems thinker, and a leader who's made bold moves across borders, business models, and career chapters. She's launched products across pharma, biotech, and diagnostics. She's an American who's lived and led in multiple countries and now serves as a CCO for a startup in Germany. But Erin's story isn't about chasing titles or playing the corporate playbook. It's about curiosity, reinvention, and listening to the voices that often go unheard. We're going to explore the highs, the hard calls, and the human side of building strategies that actually land in the real world, and what it takes to lead without losing yourself in the process. Erin, welcome to Active Ingredients.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. I hope I live up to it.
No problem. You certainly will. We've spoken many times, and you've spoken to lots of people in my business, and we've always had great discussions. This could be like a 5-hour podcast if we wanted it to be.
Easily.
But we're going to try and bring it down to some of the things that you're most passionate about. But some of the things I'm most passionate about is leadership, especially in life sciences. And I like to start these podcasts with the same questions. So what do you think are the 3 key ingredients of successful leadership, and why?
So, Tom, I love this question because it really made me think about how to distill things down into 3. You could, as you mentioned, go on for 5 hours. I'd say the first one is around clarity in vision and action. A successful leader has to be clear. And Brené Brown, you'll hear me talk about her throughout our discussion, is one of my favorite writers, podcasts, thought leaders. And she says, clear is kind. So people want to know where they're going, and they want to know why they're going, and they want to know that they can trust you to get there. I'd say the second thing is what I like to call empathy with backbone. So you hear a lot now about empathy. That's really important. Without empathy, structure can become control, and no one really likes to be in that. But without structure, you get indulgence. And I think many of us have maybe been in that situation where it's a bit like a kid where your parents let you do whatever you want. It sounds great in theory, but you don't really grow or learn. And then I think the third one is really adaptability with integrity. And I didn't say flexibility, I said adaptability, because I think we all naturally have to have a certain tensile strength in business these days. But it's more that when you face a situation as a really good leader, you have to be willing to evaluate it quickly and then bring what is needed when it's needed. And that's the same thing for people. Bring what they need when they need it.
Love that. Clarity, vision and action, empathy with backbone, adaptability with integrity.
Yes.
Love these. Okay. So what we normally see as well is as we ask the questions throughout the podcast, some of these start to come to the fore. But shall we talk before corporate life? Shall we get a bit of an understanding of you at kind of school and university time, just so the listeners can understand a little bit, maybe if there's any direction posts for you to have an entrepreneurial career in life sciences? Did you think there was anything that would say that you'd have that career?
This question also really made me think because life sciences know this concept of translating complexity into something that's accessible. Yes. So I was not in the science fair. I was in the book fair. I was very much driven to what people would say, I guess, nerdy pursuits. So I was in the spelling bee and the debate team and the quiz team, and I was editor of the school newspaper and on the literary magazine, and I went to what you would call uni on a Latin scholarship. So none of this really adds up to the career that I've had. But what I would say that I see the thread when I look back now and I kind of see what pulled through is this idea about curiosity, lifelong learning, and being challenged. And so everything I've done in my career has been around sort of not making the impossible possible, but sort of taking something, untangling it, and bringing it to fruition. So I do see those early threads, whether I'm, digging through ancient Latin texts, or today working on a launch plan for, a new medtech device that we've got. And what I love about life sciences is that learning aspect. So now, as with anything, it's very hindsight. It's very easy to look back and connect it. But it does kind of make sense when I see the path that I've taken. But young me thought she was going to be a lawyer because I watched way too much Perry Mason at my grandma's house.
Yeah, okay. So then it's like fixated in law. That seems like a good career path because it's on the TV.
It was just more like I like to argue and I like to unpack situations. And because of my pattern recognition, it was just always very clear. If someone's, I don't know, on the stand saying I did this, I'm thinking, well, why don't you ask this? And why don't you do that? And why don't you do that? So that seemed like it would be a career path. And I never got there. When I was in uni, I went for Latin, transitioned to math because I like theoretical math, not necessarily math every day, or maths, as you say. Then went into history because I got curious about things, and that sort of brought me back to English lit. But I think that if I had had a really good advisor, they would probably have directed me somewhere towards marketing or econ, something like
Yeah, nice.
that. Yeah.
Nice. I like how sometimes the puzzle pieces, if you flip them the other way, they still
Mm-hmm.
fit.
Yep.
So it seems as though this has been quite good moment for you to reflect on those early years and, as you said, like be able to connect them slightly.
It has. And when I think about what you do for a living, I'm sort of a living example of potential, not pedigree, because part of the way I was preparing for this was thinking about leaders that shaped my career and opportunities that I had. And so much about that was about possibility, not necessarily probability. So I was always the wild card in many of the teams that I was in. But it just goes to show that, especially if you're evaluating talent or you're looking at the future of our industry, there's a lot to unlock if you're just willing to take a little bit of time and understand the full picture.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. Can we go back to always the wild card? I really do want to talk about
Sure.
that. But what I'd like to do is maybe to get a further understanding of your like life journey. I suppose one question that would be good is like, when did you feel like a leader for the first time?
Um, I'm not, to be fair, there are days where I'm not too sure I actually feel 100% because it's not imposter syndrome, but you're always growing and learning. But when I thought about this question, it was really back when I had cross functional sort of responsibility. I was living in Seattle, I was working in ultrasound, and I was leading the marketing activities for a specialized part of the sales team of the company. And there was just a moment where I realized that 30 plus people are looking at me to set direction, to answer questions, to give guidance, to solve challenges. And it occurred to me that if, I don't know, not we're an army, but that I'm sort of at the front now. I'm not just an operator, I'm actually shaping things. And so that's the first light bulb moment, I would say. It wasn't a big aha moment, but it was a dawning recognition of the role that I was playing, which was very different than someone just being inside the system as an individual contributor.
Yeah. And did you, at that point, you spoke about, or we've spoken about imposter syndrome early in career, but like you've got these people looking at you, it's time to create strategy and start executing. How did you do that? Blind confidence? What was the thing that what was the catalyst for you stepping into the white space in front of you?
So sometimes if you don't know, you don't know. There's a little bit of a power in that, but I'm a problem solver. So here's a problem. We have to launch product or we have to get into market. So I'd solve the problem. What I would say that bolts into that I didn't quite have the light bulb moment yet is that it's not brute force, but the bulldozer approach. Like if I go from point A to point B, I can get there and I can see very clearly how to get there. So let's go there. And part of that leadership journey for me, and it was an evolution over sort of wins and losses, was realizing that you don't always go A, B. You might go A, C, Q, and there's a reason for that. And it's not always the most logical reason, which is hard for someone like me that just kind of thinks, let's do what makes the most sense. So it wasn't just confidence. It was just I knew I could solve the problem. But then actually sometimes, and there are people who have some great stories, in solving a problem, I would create more problems for myself that I would then have to go untangle. Or I hadn't quite mastered how to communicate my solution. So there's a great leader. I think of him very fondly, but he actually threw me out of his office at one point. He was like, you have to stop. You need to leave. You need to go out the door, go there and come back another time. And looking back, what I was trying to do was right. It was the right thing. The company didn't do it. It was the right thing. But the way I was trying to, no. So that was also a light bulb moment that it's not just doing the thing. It's actually being able to communicate what you're doing in a way that gives other people trust and confidence that you can do the thing.
Yeah. And you and I have actually spoken previously, and we won't get into too much detail on this, but you had a leadership story from even pre-life sciences that you learned a lot, and actually it was quite a good introspective moment for you to think maybe I wasn't the greatest leader as a teenager or in your early 20s, to then actually be able to self-reflect a lot better.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure I even had a light bulb at that moment because I felt like the world was unfair. I think I was 21, 22. I worked in retail and I took it with the absolute most seriousness. These sweaters must be folded. These customers must be treated this way. And nobody liked working for me. And I had a district manager sit me down and say, this is a problem. We love you. We think you're great. You embody the brand. You live and breathe this clothing line. But you are treating this with a level of severity that the average person clocking in for what, I don't know, $6 an hour? No. So it was, it was a moment where I realized leading is not being a dictator, because you grow up thinking leading is telling people what to do. And there's a piece of that, but that's a privilege. That's not the whole thing. And so that is something I was able to look back on as I've had my leadership journey and kind of say, oh my gosh, I know what she was talking about now. She wasn't picking on me. Absolutely, people probably hated it, and here's why. But I'm not sure I
Yeah.
connected the dots at the time.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think, being able to learn from those moments
Mm-hmm.
will actually, then you're in Seattle a few years later in a different kind of world, but at least you've got that
Yeah.
understanding and somebody's already kind of given you a little bit of mentoring advice.
Yes, and I guess true to form, like that was a moment where I, fell down because no one likes to get fired, especially from a job in the mall. And I realized you can be a high performer. I had top sales, for the mall job, but you just keep going. So you asked me what I took away. I'm not even sure. I don't say I was smart enough, but maybe mature enough to even realize there was a lesson. I just kept going. Good or bad, I just said, okay, well, on to the next thing, and we'll try to piece this together over time.
Yeah, great. And then you ended up in Seattle, right? So you're there, you're feeling like a leader, and then your curiosity obviously takes your career and your life in a totally different direction.
It did. I mean, there's a whole story behind it, but succinctly, I learned French as a kid, have always loved languages, and have always had sort of like a travel bug. But I'm from Ohio, and when I moved to Seattle, you might have thought I moved to Antarctica the way people in my hometown approach that. But I had this thought that I cannot be a true global anything, global marketing leader, or any strategy, et cetera, if I'm not actually in the globe. So it's very different to set a strategy sitting in Seattle that's going to be executed in the UK or France or something, but you're not there seeing it happen. So I had always wanted to get that operational experience. And then through just a variety of things happening, there was an opportunity for me to look for a new role. I love this story because I actually went on LinkedIn. This is 2009, and I sent 150 blind messages to people like yourself, companies, saying, "Hi, I'm American. Will you take me?" Basically, in very professional language. Got a few people responding, ended up interviewing, and moved myself to the UK through the Postal Service. Did my own visa, cashed out some of my savings to fund it because at the time they would have had to justify why they wouldn't hire someone in the UK. So they really wanted me, but I had to lead into that. And I knew nobody and took a huge risk. But it was probably the most transformational thing I did because it absolutely changed the trajectory of my career and what I'm able to say with some authority about how different markets work because I lived it.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. I've worked in the executive search space for nearly 25 years, and there aren't as many global Americans
Hmm.
in the workforce as you think. There's some people that have gone and, worked for a couple of months or a couple of weeks in Europe every year, but actually it's the integration into society, into the culture that I've really enjoyed discussing with you. So let's talk about you being a global American.
Mm-hmm.
How did that personal and professional transformation start? So obviously you've moved to the UK first and foremost. Can you give the listeners a bit of an overview of how you de-Americanized yourself as you then moved through different parts of Europe?
Absolutely. And so for anyone from the US listening to this, there are still people who will remember me as the super loud American who wanted to celebrate the 4th of July in the UK. So part of it was the kindness, and they were strangers at the time, but then they became coworkers and some of them friends, helping me. I was sitting in an open plan office where I was the only non-global person. I was the only American in this, or North American, I should say, because there were people from Latin America. And they just would say things to me like, "You're very loud. You're very boasting. You're very presumptuous. Here is a history book. You did not single-handedly win all the wars. Like, you started a lot of, I mean, not to get into politics, but the guy that sat right next to me was from Iraq. And so he and I had some very fascinating discussions. There was a woman from Mexico. We got into some immigration discussions, but it was almost like taking, or like people who can't see very well, like I've had to get reading glasses as I've gotten older. And when I take them off to try to read small print, it's blurry. So I can see it, but it's so much clearer with the glasses. They gave me a prescription for lenses that let me see beyond myself. And then that's important because in learning that, it changes the way you interact with people. So you have to come to the table expecting different backgrounds, different opinions, different ways of doing things. And that was so transformational for me because a lot of US business culture is very competitive and it's very, this is the way. And you go to leadership trainings and you do it this way. That was very hard for me to learn that it is a way and that might doesn't make right. Just because the US is incredibly successful in business doesn't mean it's the answer. It's what has worked over time and that you have to ask a lot of questions. So again, another light bulb moment. I wouldn't say check, it's fixed, aha, everything's done, but it got me, it really made me appreciate and want to be surrounded by more diversity of thought, which comes with diversity of experience and background.
Yeah. And also, we've spoken about properly integrating
Yes,
into the cultures as well. So for the listeners, like you've lived in the UK,
yes,
you've lived in Germany,
yes,
you've lived in Denmark.
yes.
Where else have you lived?
Well, I did a short stint sort of back and forth in Italy because I was thinking I was supposed to be moving to Italy. So enough that I started learning a little bit of Italian and got to understand why things are never on time. But I would say for the UK, what was really important to me was it's not just, and you mentioned people doing stints. You don't just show up as a tourist in the country. That's very different. It's not an extended vacation. So you need to be fully immersed that you have to experience the way things are done, the bureaucracy. And a great example I give is the post office, the most mundane thing on earth. I nearly had a breakdown because I went to the post office and I didn't understand how to ship a package. It's not that different in the UK, but it is different to the US. There's like a little cage you have to put your box in, and there's this whole thing, and same language, relatively speaking, but I felt like such a fish out of water. And I just had this moment of you can't go in thinking you know how to do it. So I almost say the UK was harder for me than Germany because I showed up thinking I already knew. And then you go to simple things like the grocery store, but then you start to make local friends and you get the sense of humor. So I love British humor, British slang. When I go back to London, it's like putting on a pair of shoes that I know how to wear. They're very comfortable. And then I start to understand how and why things are done and why you should not yell and be so loud, that there's an easier way to get things done in a different style of diplomacy, etc. So I always advocate for people when you move, try not to live in these expat bubbles. So I lived in Rains Park, but I think it was South Kensington that was known as like Little America or something. It's comfortable, but then everyone you're going to meet is going to be just like you. So you're not really in the UK. You're kind of like in a Disney World version of it, and you're not really experiencing what you could tell me about your background. So you have to go to people's homes. I celebrated British Christmas with the crackers and the Queen on TV, and all of that adds to the richness of the experience.
Yeah, and that's a line that you've used as well, is the richness of the experience actually gives you so much more professionally as well,
It does.
because you and I have spoken about really understanding your colleagues in a completely different way.
Yes. And I wouldn't say, I don't think there's anybody in the world that's an expert, but one of the things it taught me the most is if I were to go into a meeting and, for example, it's primarily people from England or the UK per se, there's a whole different way that I would prime myself to have that discussion. We are not going to barrel through straight to the answer. We're going to talk around it a bit. We're going to talk about it very respectfully. We're going to need to close the loop, and then you have to listen very carefully for things like, oh, interesting, which means you don't like it. So you have to pick up on the social cues. And one of the things is I went to Japan a lot in this role when I was in the UK. And my stepdad had spent some time in Japan, and I really love the culture. And you realize very quickly that they will say yes to almost everything out of politeness the first 2, 3, 4 times. So if you're presenting something, you really have to have the patience to ask many times. You'll hear like, oh, it's great. Actually, maybe not so much. And that's when the real meeting starts. So if you don't do that, you come away thinking everything's sunshine and roses. And those are just small examples that you have to live through. You're in the Netherlands, they're just going to tell you what they think. That's it. You can't get offended. They're just going to be very direct. If you're someone like me that likes that, that's great. But if you're in a mixed group, you got to figure out how to balance that so that you can actually get things done without people feeling that they're not heard. So it's a bit like conducting an orchestra, and I never feel like I get it right every time, but I love the challenge. And in my last role, I had people coming from the Middle East, which is different part of the world, and learning those cultural norms. And it was just very fascinating every day.
But it strikes me that you just have much more of, well, curiosity, but an awareness of it. There
Yeah.
sometimes with the kind of globalized American, as I say, we don't see as many people coming to Europe for proper tenures of time to really integrate themselves
Yeah.
into culture. But now your awareness of it means that you're taking that moment to pause to understand more about the people that are around you in that boardroom.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, and people fascinate me, and I'm a why person. And as soon as I realized that there's a way to do that in a way that's beneficial and not challenging, I can't go up to people and say, why are you like that? Even though I'm thinking that. You can harness that. But I don't want to give anyone listening the idea that this was just natural and easy for me, because I made a fair amount of mistakes. And a lot of that, when I talk about flexibility, was me trying to meet people where I was, or me thinking I had the answers about where they were. Or probably my biggest failure as a leader is I try to manage people the way I want to be managed, which sounds great, like a corporate golden rule kind of thing. No, because there's only one me. And so what I think is brilliant, give me some work, leave me alone, give me big targets. There's people out there that's terrifying for. And there are people who like a lot of check-ins and follow through and process. And to me, that would make me quit. So it's not just being aware of all the different people. It's also getting a general sense for the cultures and then going beneath to understand the individual for that. And I would say that's been the hardest part, but also the biggest privilege and pleasure of my leadership journey.
Yeah, nice. And you said to me once that there was a moment of almost like rewiring your brain,
Mm-hmm.
that embracing a slower, potentially more integrated way of working. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
So I was like, which one does he mean? Because I feel like I've had some of those, but one that really stuck out is so I was in Denmark for a couple of years, working for a very large pharmaceutical company, and I had a great boss, actually a British boss, and he just kept giving me feedback, like, you have to flex your style, you have to flex your style, and the whole time I'm thinking, I don't understand this conversation, and then through some training and support, I got to this idea to articulate something I had felt but wasn't quite sure how to change, which is this idea of curiosity versus judgment, which sounds so obvious when you say it, but it's so easy to come from a place of judgment without even thinking we're judging. That, well, they didn't do this because, or I don't know why they didn't do it, but then you immediately try to think of why they didn't do it. And that is hard, especially if you're, as I am a systems thinker, if you're looking for patterns, if you're looking to connect the dots, or if you're like, I've worked with people who are just very go, go, go. It is very hard to stop and not come to a conclusion. And so that transformational moment for me was, Erin, you love questions. Make them work for you. Be curious. Be curious. Why does Tom have so many plants in his office? Don't decide that Tom loves plants. Maybe the office manager put them in there and you thought, it's not bad, looks great. I don't know. Maybe you need more oxygen. Maybe they're fake. I have no idea. But it's a very simple example to say that when you've decided the conclusion, where do you go? You're like in a room and you've picked one door. Whereas, hey, lots of nice plants. I like those. Why do you have plants? And then you might even say, oh, I have plants. I'm in here every day. I didn't even pay attention. So many doors to go. So that, it was one of those things that's so obvious that I really felt stupid at that moment. I had that like, oh God, you're such an idiot. But it has really changed not just my professional life, my personal life as well. And I speak specifically of my siblings. And anyone with siblings, you know how easy it is to decide they're wrong or they're whatever. And so I think it's just a great tool to remind ourselves, just be curious.
Yeah, curiosity over
Be
judgment.
curious.
I really
Yeah.
like that. Now, one of the things I can't leave before we go on to some of the other parts of the discussion, I can't leave this topic, right? So you're an American that's relocated to Europe.
Yes. Couple.
Some people, a couple of times, exactly. Some people are probably in that mode right now where it's like, there's an opportunity for me to go and live in Switzerland or Germany. Am I going to take it? Then they look at the, I don't know, lifestyle or finance, the package, and then they don't go for it because it doesn't make sense. Do you have like a quick framework or thought process as to how people can make that decision in a better way?
I don't know if I have like a patented framework, but first I would say anyone listening to this who's maybe working with Tom and team and who has questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll happily talk with you offline. But I reverse it a little bit. Anyone I've talked through this discussion, I say, write down what's most important to you about your life right now. Let's just assume you will be paid a living wage, and that's competitive to where you're living, which is, I'll get to that in a minute. But, okay, well, my kids can walk to school. I can go to a grocery store. I like to golf, whatever. Write that down about your life. The idea when you're moving is not apple for apple. So I tell people that when I moved from Seattle to the UK, I took what looked like on paper about a 50% pay cut. Everyone thought I was mad, to use a British term. It was absolutely off my rocker. However, what I realized when I moved is, okay, the job came with a company car because that's pretty standard if you're out visiting physicians or whatever in Europe. Where I lived, I could walk to everything. So I was living in Canterbury at the time. I could walk to the grocery store. My social structure is all around. And then I looked at not just cost of living, but quality of living. And I started to kind of price out to do the things that I like to do. I didn't need to worry about paying for healthcare at the point of care. So that was a big one. There were a lot of things that went down, but dollar for dollar, it looked like a loss. But actually, when I got to the UK, I realized I was paid a very good salary, commensurate with people around me, people I worked with. We were very open about it. And I thought, okay, and I did not notice a single change. As a matter of fact, my life got better because I could just get on a plane and go to Greece or go to Spain or go to Italy or hop on a train. And so when people have families, then you're sitting on the East Coast, you may be making some big money. Like I know some people making 300, 400, 500,000 US dollars in these executive roles. You don't get that in Europe. Switzerland might show you that money, but then as an American, you're going to have to pay taxes. So you lose at least a month's paycheck for that. Don't do that. Look at, okay, I live in a 3-bedroom apartment here. How much is a 3-bedroom apartment? You have to really approach it differently. And then you have to look at the cost of living where you are and what you value. And your life will change because the US is I'm wrapping up here. I know I'm going a bit long, but the US is a very consumerist driven culture, good or bad. But we spend a lot of our time buying things, going out to eat. It's a different way of living. Whereas I find my life here is a lot more socially driven. So I might go out to eat, but I might sit there for 3 hours with friends. And I don't really go to the mall. And I travel. I use my money to go have experiences, fewer things. So I would just encourage people, don't look at that salary offer or that salary band and decide you're taking a loss, because you're probably not relative to the economy that you're going back in. And any good recruiter, if you want to come back to the US, will connect the dots, because you will be coming
Yeah,
back with something most people will never have.
yeah. And that cultural richness as well that we've spoken about, can't put a dollar sign on that.
No, to come back, and if you give it time, if you don't just come over for 6 months and then, bounce back, to be able to go back into a leadership role saying, yes, I have been a GM in Germany, or I have been in Tokyo, or I've been in Australia. You're already, when there's all these CVs on the table that are very similar, because a lot of us follow a similar track, that actually has been a differentiating factor for me so many times.
Yeah. The amount of episodes that I've done now with active ingredients with executive leaders in life sciences, 95% of them have moved countries, moved continents. It's wild. I wonder if I distill everything at the end of this first season and look at the active ingredients, I wonder if there's a little bit of familiarity between everybody's career paths and how they've been able to
You'll
move. And
probably find curiosity is because to do that, to pick up and move, and it's not easy. I don't care even if you get the sweet expat deal that almost doesn't exist for anyone anymore. It's not easy. It's disruptive. And I always tell people there's a wave. The first 6 months, you're like, woo, because it feels like a holiday. The next 6 to 9, for some people, even 12 months, it's hard. All you could think about is how different it is and how hard it is. But if you can come through that, it's transformative.
yeah. And then I think that as you said, that kind of cultural richness, that transformative element, the understanding of different cultures, different ways of working can only make you a better leader.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about leadership. Okay. You and I have spent some time talking about the building blocks of successful leadership, and you've been kind of almost distilling how you've worked and the teams that you've built into these blocks. Can we talk about that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so in terms of building teams, I've had a fair amount of trial and error, as I think most people have. And I will say at the beginning, I really used to over focus on risk mitigation, hiring to the role spec, to the JD, to the resume, because I had a lot of concern that if I bring in someone and they don't execute, how does that look on me as a leader and my judgment? What I very quickly realized is everyone's human. And I mean, if you hire 10 people and they all are good, then there's a different challenge, but that's what your HR business partner is there to help you with and help guide you if you have a strong relationship. So the building blocks that I look at are curiosity, there it is again, kindness.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter about personality. I'm not talking about introvert, extrovert. I'm talking about pure kindness at the heart, which is also often tied to empathy, and then learning agility. And if I look at the last couple teams that I built or shaped, if you took their CVs and the roles that they were doing, you put it through these magic AI systems that we all have now, most of them wouldn't make it through. But these teams were very successful and they perform very well. And it's actually some of those disparities that make them the strongest. So because the personality types were, I want to know, I'm curious, I want to learn. And so things they didn't know, they will go find someone who does. But you can't just bring someone in who's very eager. They have to be curious as well, because eagerness without curiosity, I think we also make that mistake, make someone very ambitious and then they don't listen. And they become that person that is very political on the team. And I've actually had to deal with that. That's not good either.
And what about this kind of the communication within the team as well? So I'm loving the curiosity, the kindness, that learning agility. We've spoken before as well about having natural explainers. So have you been able to do that by building teams with folks from different functions and actually putting them together because of the way that they can communicate as an organization and as a function?
The best balance I've had has actually been with people across the communication spectrum. So if I think of the last team that I had, there are people who sort of need an activator They need someone else to be either asking questions or dragging them along for them to open up almost like a flower and then share their knowledge. So you can't have a whole team of people who are all, I'm going to explain, I'm going to get up, I'm going to present. That sounds really good because they look good on stage, but you have kind of people who are slow burn who also can be incredibly powerful, but they need that spark from someone else. So that's what I find. It's you call it active ingredients. It's if you're making a recipe, everything can't be overpowering. And I think those of us who cook know that sometimes you can add something in like a little bit of cinnamon or cayenne pepper or turmeric, and it causes the entire recipe to pop. But when you read the ingredients, you would think, why would, like, first time I saw cinnamon in hot chocolate or cayenne pepper, I thought that's crazy. And then boom, your mouth is, wow, this is amazing. So I always try to look for those activators and then the styles that would really bloom if they got the right nutrients, so to speak.
Yeah, love it. So way more like purposeful in trying to curate the right team with the right voices and the right listeners
Yeah,
and
and I have made some of my HR business partners a little crazy, but I try not to look at any hiring decision in isolation. And I know a lot of managers do. They say, when we hire, it has to be a team fit. Yeah, but you have to really, really think that through. And you have to be willing to recognize, because I had an experience where I hired someone who individually was great and on paper was great, but the dynamic of the team that I had at the time, it just didn't work. And that was not a detriment to the individual or to the people in the team, but I had to make a hard call early on and say, I'm sorry, in the probation period, this is not working. But I was very clear to the individual. It was nothing about their skill set, capabilities, or anything. It was just, I don't know, it didn't fit in the recipe that we had in what I already had. So I either had to change the entire rest of the other team or be selfish and bring someone in that I liked, but recognize that it's going to cause a disruption. And I see that happen a lot where leaders underestimate just like dropping someone in and kind of expecting everyone to figure out the, I would say damage, but kind of the damage that it can do to team morale and productivity. And that's where you'll see it over a couple of years, some attrition, people going here, people going there, because they can't put their finger on it, but something's been disrupted and not in a good
yeah,
way.
yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. So you're somebody that likes problem solving, you like complex challenges. How about we discuss keeping things simple?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got these big problems, you've got the good teams. How do you simplify the complex to get, the right strategies and execution in place?
Back to my favorite question, why? And I have to be honest, if I ever meet Simon Sinek, I'm slightly annoyed because I've been saying why since I was 3 years old. So I would say he stole my bit, but good on him because he's made a whole career out of it. But seriously, if you was just talking about a problem this week with my current team, and I just kind of said, why are we doing that again? Can we go to exit? That's what we're planning for, and walk backwards. So if you look at a product launch, for example, most people look forward. Okay, we're launching the product in 2028. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. I always say, okay, time machine, get in our DeLorean. It's 2028. What does that look like? Okay, we're the number one product. Amazing. What would need to have happened to do that? Oh, nope, don't give me big things. Go back 3 months, 3 months to launch. What does it need to look like? Oh, well, the teams need to be fully staffed. We need to have materials out, competitive strat, et cetera. We need to have supply, good pricing approved. Okay, great. How would you get there? Well, Erin, you'd have to go back 6 months more and hire okay. And we walk backwards. And then it becomes very clear what needs to be done, when, and what priority. And then what compromises you'd be making along the way that if you choose not to hire, for example, until 3 months before launch, there's a very strong likelihood you may not achieve that ultimate goal. But that may be okay in the broader, depending on what your goal is, you may say I want to be number one at launch, but is it maybe just to have a presence in this market or do the best with what we've got because resources could be constrained? But I find by putting it in the smaller chunks, and I actually learned this from a great boss. I was dealing with something overwhelming, and she had me sit down, and she's like, I want you to make a 90-day plan. I'm like, oh, okay. She's like, now go back and make a 30-day plan. Like, okay. She's like, now go back, break it down week by week. And I want you to tell me what has to happen for you to get to here and here. And that is so powerful and so effective because if I say, I want you to find me my next big role. Well, I guess at first I would probably have sent someone a CV. Okay. So then I have to look at my CV. Does it say what I want to say? Back up, back up. You're going to ask me what kind of job do you want? And I can't just say a cool one. Or you're going to say, sure, let me call someone at one of these top 10 pharma companies I know. How do I sell you? Right? So all those things have to happen. And they're very simple in isolation. Is it something you can do in small chunks? I can review my CV in an hour one day. I can think about my elevator pitch. But when you look at it all at once, it can seem like completely like Sisyphus, overwhelming. You're just pushing it up the hill and you're never going to get there.
Yeah,
That's
no, I love
literally
it. And
true for pretty much anything if you think about it.
yeah, but it takes that moment, doesn't it? That catalyst of, if you are a good problem solver, sometimes there's an even better way of doing it. And to have that advice and be able to look back.
And back, you asked me in the beginning, kind of your ingredients. So clarity. So that's part of like knowing where you want to go and why you want to go there. And that can change over time. But then that's where that empathy comes in because people are going to struggle in this process. So you're going to need to lean in and understand, okay, why are they fighting me on wanting to hire salespeople? It's probably not their dream when they wake up in the morning. What's going on behind that? Let me take 5 minutes, have a coffee. Oh, okay, their boss is under budget constraints. Okay, we're under budget constraints because we've undersold in this other part of the business. Okay, let me get the bigger picture here. Now we can work to a win together. And then I think that's where that adaptability comes in because you will get to the end. How you get there is almost always going to be very different than what you thought it would be. But as long as you're clear on where you're going, and I'm in no way a warmonger by any means, but I love military strategy and I love reading about, because we can always look at it in hindsight, right? About plans and the best generals over time. And you can go way, way back in history were always the ones that always were taking a snapshot. They didn't go into battle and say, this is our plan, we're going. They're like, we're doing, oh, okay, Tom and his troops are on the right hill instead of the left hill. Let me play through what that might mean. All right, I got a second plan. But the second plan wasn't reactive. It was something that made sense that they could explain to people why they're doing it. And usually when you see these catastrophic failures was because there was just a brute force one way to do it. And it's not necessarily a wrong way to do it, but there was no willingness to adapt along the way for various reasons.
And adaptability, so it's adaptability with integrity. Let's talk about your viewpoint then on internal mobility, because as you said at the beginning of the conversation, you were always the wild card.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've also built teams where you're promoting the idea of bringing in wild cards, because you've said previously that with a lack of internal mobility, it's fizzling out some careers. Can we explore that a little
Yeah.
bit more?
So, what I was trying to speak to that is it's been in my experience that it's a lot easier to get buy-in and sign off on hiring someone from the outside who might be kind of not a risk. Well, I guess it is a risk, but unusual, non-traditional. But then when you're inside the company, people hit these roadblocks. So they want to move, and actually on a couple of previous teams I've had people move across disciplines, science to commercial, strategy into commercial, commercial into market access, and so on and so forth. That took me being the engine behind to just constantly challenge these assumptions of, yeah, but they're not experienced enough. Okay, well, how are they going to get the experience? And so I think it's on us as leaders. I get very frustrated sometimes with other leaders, and it's probably not fair. And again, I'm in my judging hat, but I don't want to say they're lazy, but they just sort of try once. HR says no, and they give up. And there was a woman, I prepared as an example for this, that I worked with in the UK. She was in, I think, customer service, but sat right next to us on my product line. She knew more about the product line than I ever could probably figure out in 5 years. She really wanted to be a product manager or junior product manager, product specialist. And she was just hitting a wall. She didn't have the right qualifications. She didn't have a Chartered Institute of Marketing degree. She didn't have this. So we got her there, but it was about me breaking down the components of the role and saying, what part of this role does she need that to do? And then giving her pieces of that role to demonstrate a small win, a small win, a small win, a small win, so that it just became undeniable. And actually, this woman now is very senior with a really great marketing career in the life sciences space. And that's down to her hard work, but I'm very privileged to have been part of that journey to try to crack open the door. And I see this being incredibly harder for diverse candidates for some reason. So anyone who does not fit the standard profile, it's like the wall gets doubly higher. So I don't have a solution, but I think there needs to be a responsibility put on everyone in leadership. It is your responsibility to not just climb the ladder and holler down some advice. Not only reach down and pull people up, but look to the side. Who is also trying to get somewhere and they just need a bridge across?
Yeah.
And we don't do that enough. And I've sat in leadership discussions and they're like, yeah, well, but then that's the name of the game, in my opinion.
And we've spoken about the resilience curve, but also people losing their spark by staying in something too long.
Yeah.
So if you do make that change, you get comfortable being uncomfortable, you go through the resilience curve, or you don't do that and you stay for 30 years in the same role in the same company.
Yeah, it's one of those things that no matter how curious I get, I'm not sure I'm ever going to understand the other side of the coin. But here's what I see happen so many times. I talk to someone, they're like, been in this job for 5 years. I'm bored. Okay, great. What are you doing about it? Oh, well, there's a job, but it's like the opportunity cost to look at something else is zero. So many people think that if they apply for a job, one, that means they're going to get the job, but that they've crossed the Rubicon or taken some unforgivable action. You don't know until you try. And I've been honest with people. In every job I've had, I've always taken calls from recruiters. I've even thrown my hat in the ring just to see what happens, but I've been very honest about it. Like, I'm happy where I'm at, but like, who knows? Because almost all of my last 5 or 6 jobs came from a conversation like that. Right? So just someone saying, what if, what about? Oh, I don't know. It doesn't cost anything. So I think there's resilience, but there's also companies are trying to get to this when they say own your own career, but people don't understand that. It's more just I guess like Nike, just do it. If there's something that interests you, if you're listening to this right now and you're sitting in sales and you think I've always wanted to work in marketing, yeah, that's probably not going to be easy for you unless you get really lucky and someone pulls you across. But it doesn't cost you anything to start networking and having conversations and trying to take on a rotational aspect in marketing or take on an additional project or do a course on the way or something to get building there, to show that, because everyone I've pulled across, they have also leaned out and said, like, I'm trying to get from finance to marketing. I don't know what I'm missing. Help. And sometimes you walk a bridge, right? You might go finance to analytics, marketing analytics, get the feel for how things work. Then you move into like maybe product management before you get to full on brand responsibility, but you can get there.
Building that knowledge base
step by step. Why? Because look at the CEOs you recruit. I am always astonished when I read. It's very rare that someone's like, here's the CEO of XYZ company. And then you look at XYZ, sorry. You look at their whole career and it's just a ladder. Same fun. No. There was a time when the CEO of Pfizer was a lawyer for McDonald's. That's a whole different story, but that you see so many CEOs moving over because they're hiring for ability, for their ability to look at strategy, see the business, not, okay, have you done every single thing in this step? So if we can accept that at senior levels, and it gets more and more accepted the closer to the C-suite that you get, why don't we accept it where it's really important, where we build the next group of talent and we retain them?
Yeah, in that kind of succession pool.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally with you. So I'm eager to understand your thoughts as we're kind of edging into the last few questions here. I think this brings us on nicely to what you think about the future of leadership or the future of leadership in life sciences. Look, what are you most excited about?
Um, I'm actually most excited about Gen Z. And I'm excited because I think this is the first true generation that has figured out that you work to live, you don't live to work. Now, I will say that with some caveats because I don't think you need to go home halfway through the day because the vibes are off. And I know that's an exaggeration. And you probably can't call in because Mercury's in retrograde again. But the approach to business and to what they will, for lack of a better word, tolerate is so refreshing, especially to someone like me. I guess you would call me like a zennial or suppose, where, I mean, it was like, you need to work overtime? Okay, great. I'm always on. Let me show my work. It became overpowering of how we were sort of brought up into the industry about our value is our production. And that does not make for a healthy leader at the end because then you're modeling behaviors that are absolutely unsustainable. So I'm excited when I see younger people come in and when I work with them, I find that they are dedicated, they're curious, they want to multitask, they want to learn lots of things, but they're the first ones to say, hey, that feels a little excessive. Like, does it really have to be done 2 weeks worth of work in 3 days? Or do we want it to be done? What would happen if it wasn't done? And these are great questions because the world probably doesn't turn on a brand plan, right? So that's what I'm most excited about. And I'm most excited to have the opportunity to be in the industry because right now, if I look at one side, I've got a lot of what people would say boomers or traditional Gen X, and you can learn from their experiences. And then I can lean over and Gen Z is in the workforce. And then some of the younger people popping up are the next generation, right? They're in high school and they're asking questions. Hey, my nephew's friends, how do I have a career in this? What would I do? So it's a unique position in time to straddle the pre-digital generations and the purely digital generations.
Yeah, love it. The first answer actually so far where people have said, or a guest has said that they're excited about Gen Z because some people are a little bit worried about their place in the workforce as we dive headfirst into a more digital AI driven world.
I think the workforce has to change. And so that's why I said with a caveat, there are some things where I see concern and a lot of it is on LinkedIn. So I follow a lot of posts and there's a lot of people looking for work right now and they're struggling. And then so I look to see, oh, can I help? And I look at CVs or the work history and it's 12 months here, 6 months there, 9 months there, 18 months there. It's very consistent pattern. And I don't know if that was driven sometimes during COVID where it was a employees market, you could jump your salary pretty quick or if they're bored or what. But that's a problem right now with the people doing the hiring because you haven't demonstrated that you can own something through a full cycle and actually do the things you say in your CV. So what you're showing up as an operator, which is very turnkey and a dime a dozen, not someone that can lead something through whatever it is, a social media campaign. You've got to do it and then you've got to see the fallout from what you've done and if it worked and then try it and change it and do it again. So that's a little bit of a concern. But on the plus side, the reason why I'm excited is there's going to be enough of them that are needed. As you mentioned, I think even before we started workforce, we've got the inverted pyramid. People are retiring and passing on, that the system is going to have to change. And you see this with where you work, how you work, the style in which you work. And it's a much more empathetic style of working. And I actually think if organizations can lean into it, it will be for the better for all of us.
Yeah.
But lean into it with an asterisk. That's why I always say kind of empathy with boundaries or with structure.
Backbone. Yeah.
Right. Because it can't be just like woo, woo, woo all the time. But I mean, you need to leave to go to the doctor, you need to leave early, you don't feel good, whatever. It's not the end of the world. You should have parental leave. We should give people equal chances in a role. You should have a space to be authentic. You talked about at the beginning about not losing your voice. You should not be some sort of corporate robot. And I love that for them, that they're saying, I'm not going to do that. Like, absolutely not.
Yeah. And what about if you could think about somebody now that's in the workforce in like a, I don't know, a director type role, where they're maybe stepping up into a new leadership role for the first time, where they're feeling like a leader and that they're really taking on a challenge. What piece of advice would you give those kind of leaders out there at the moment?
I think until you recognize that actually the leader part of it involves the people, you are just a new box on an org chart. And this is hard truth. It's truth that I had to learn myself, because you get a little bit excited. You're a director, you become a senior director, team lead, whatever, and you're a little bit drunk with the power, or you're at the VP level for the first time and you're like, yeah, I've made it. And you get to make decisions and you get to sign off on things and you get to set direction, which is great. All of that is functional and replaceable. What is much more important on your journey is what are the legacy or the mark you're leaving on the people around you? Because I truly believe if everyone that's on your team can't speak to something they've learned, something that they would do in the future that they've taken from you, or something they would not do, right? Because we all take pieces. You're not doing your job. Your job is not to sit there behind a desk and you'll be a manager leader. Your job is to bring out the best in the people around you. Sometimes those are hard conversations, because sometimes the best for someone is not where they are right now. It may even be an exit. But until you've tackled that and you've recognized that anyone can approve an expense report or make a report or make a strategic plan, the people that stick with us, and you had asked me about like some of my favorite leaders, they're people who change us in ways for the better. And that comes with both knowing what to do and what not to do. So my advice is, if you're a director and you're suddenly given new leadership, take a breather, take 5. It's what I would tell my younger self. Just calm down. Perfection is not the goal here. And then take a step back and look at people around you who are in that senior level, who are doing things that you like, and just emulate them for a little while. It's not fake it till you make it, but don't do the things that you see people doing that make their whole team crazy. And then the third thing is just listen. Spend a lot of time listening to the people that you have the privilege to lead. Listen without judgment, listen without arguing, just take it in. Let it process, let it simmer before you make any big changes, because the other mistake I made is I came in and wanted to change everything, which felt great to me because it was so logical, and people don't like that. That did not go over very well.
Yeah. So be curious, listen, ask those questions, but yeah, take on board what they're saying. I love that though. Calm down.
Yeah, just take 5. You asked me, what would you go back and tell your younger self? And I would just be like, whoosah. Like, patience, young Padawan. It is a marathon, not a sprint. You can't be perfect. And back to folding those sweaters, that budget presentation, the earth is going to keep turning. And slide 5 might be wrong. That's all right, because everyone's already forgotten slide 5 by the time they leave for the coffee break. You're good. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Well, Erin, I have absolutely loved the conversation. We've covered some amazing topics today. I think that there's been some really good takeaways, both from a tactical perspective of like literally how to move, how to integrate, from the US to Europe, but also there has been some amazing clarity. I've vision and action. I've heard it. Empathy with backbone, adaptability with integrity. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable episode. I hope you've liked it too.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure. It's really fun to take a moment to pause and just to look at things holistically, because I also learned some things and had some aha moments just even in this process. So thank you, Tom.
No worries. Really good. And I hope that the listeners enjoy the episode. We'd love some feedback. And also, if anybody wants to speak to Erin, if you're making a move from the US to Europe, as she said, she'd be a sounding board for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.